He dined with royalty, charmed America's most powerful people, and changed the world of writing with one unforgettable book. Truman Capote wasn't just a writer, he was a sensation. He wore silk suits that shimmered in the light, kept his sunglasses on after dark, and shared secrets over cocktails like they were the most valuable treasures. He lived like someone with nothing to lose, bold, fearless, and completely himself. By the late 1960s, Truman was the king of New York's high society. His closest friends were some of the most glamorous and influential women in the world. Women he lovingly called his swans. They weren't just beautiful, they were icons. Babe Paley, the stylish wife of CBS founder William S. Paley. Slim Keith, a Hollywood insider with serious charm. Gloria Guinness, who married into the famous beer dynasty. CZ Guest, a fashion trendsetter. Pamela Churchill Harriman, once married to Winston Churchill's son, and later a powerful diplomat. Morella Agnelli, an Italian princess with an eye for art. And Lee Radziwill, Jackie Kennedy's elegant sister. To Truman, these women were more than just friends. They were his inspiration, his confidants, and his ticket into a glittering world of wealth, style, and secrets. He listened to their stories, earned their trust, and became part of their world. But the very secrets they once shared with him would later lead to the end of it all. Behind the fancy clothes and flashing cameras, Truman was dealing with heartbreak, addiction, and a deep loneliness he couldn't escape. His life was full of fame and brilliance, but also full of betrayal and pain. His need for love, acceptance, and recognition led to a fall that was as dramatic as his rise. This is the story of Truman Capote, the boy from the Deep South who became a literary legend, the man behind In Cold Blood, and the social butterfly whose own words would eventually destroy the world he helped create. Truman Capote was born on September 30th, 1924, in the sultry, enigmatic city of New Orleans, Louisiana. From the very beginning, his life was marked by contrasts, the richness of Southern tradition clashing with personal instability, the magic of a literary future shadowed by family fractures and emotional turmoil. His parents, Archelaus Persons and Lily Mae Falk, were far from the ideal picture of stability. Arch was a charismatic but irresponsible man, more interested in dreams and schemes than in the realities of fatherhood. His mother, Lily Mae, was a beautiful, ambitious Southern woman who longed for a grander life, but was often distant and emotionally unavailable to her son. Almost immediately, Truman's life took a sharp turn. His parents separated when he was only a toddler, and his mother, seeking a better life, moved away, leaving young Truman in the care of relatives in the small town of Monroeville, Alabama. This quiet southern town, with its slow pace and traditional values, became the backdrop of Truman's earliest and loneliest years. It was here that the foundation of the boy he would become was laid. Not through parental affection or social inclusion, but through observation, imagination, and a profound sensitivity to the world around him. Monroeville was a place where everyone knew each other's business, yet Truman felt like an outsider. Small, fragile, with an unmistakable high-pitched voice and mannerisms that marked him as different, he was often the target of cruel teasing. Other children didn't understand his delicate demeanor, or his uncanny ability to remember details of conversations and people. But instead of pushing back, Truman retreated into the safe haven of books and stories. He began to listen, not just to words but to silences, glances, and unspoken emotions. This acute awareness would become one of his greatest gifts. The house where Truman stayed belonged to his relatives, but it never truly felt like home. The adults around him often treated him with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. His mother's visits were infrequent and emotionally cold, a source of both longing and rejection. Yet, despite these hardships, Truman found companionship in unexpected places. Just a few blocks away lived a girl named Nellie Harper Lee, who would become his lifelong friend and confidant. Nellie, like Truman, was a misfit in Monroeville's strict social order. She was tomboyish, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a quiet strength that matched Truman's vulnerability. The two children formed a bond that was as rare as it was powerful. Together, they explored the quiet streets and sweltering summers of Alabama, inventing stories and dreaming of worlds beyond their small town. Their friendship was a seed from which two of America's most beloved authors would eventually grow. Truman's childhood was also shaped by the ghosts of his family history. His ancestors had lived through the Old South's decline, and the lingering presence of that past seeped into his imagination. He absorbed the manners, voices, and stories of the people around him, developing an ear for dialogue and character that would serve him well in his writing. Yet beneath this rich cultural tapestry was an undeniable sadness. A boy who longed for affection, but was often met with distance. When Truman was about 11 years old, his mother finally brought him to New York City to live with her and her new husband, Joseph Capote, a Cuban émigré businessman. It was a shocking transition, from the sleepy monotony of Monroeville to the dazzling chaos of Manhattan. Truman adopted his stepfather's surname, Capote, and with it, a new identity that symbolized the first step in his transformation from a lonely Southern boy to a dazzling literary figure. But the reunion with his mother was bittersweet. Nina Capote was a woman consumed by social ambitions and a desire to climb the ladder of New York's elite. She was often emotionally distant, and her relationship with Truman was complicated by her shame and discomfort with his flamboyant personality. Truman, in turn, craved her love and approval, but found only a cool and sometimes critical presence. Yet, this distance also fueled his independence and steeled his determination to succeed on his own terms. In New York, Truman was introduced to a world of sophistication, glamour, and endless possibility, but also one of loneliness and alienation. He attended private schools but was frequently bullied and ostracized for his mannerisms and sexuality, which he did not yet fully understand or embrace openly. Instead, he found solace in literature and writing. From a young age, he was voracious, reading everything he could get his hands on, from classical novels to contemporary magazines. He began to write stories and poems, teaching himself the craft with a fierce devotion. One early breakthrough came when he was just 17. His story Miriam won a prize in Story magazine, an early sign that the literary world might be opening its doors to him. This success gave Truman a taste of validation that had been scarce in his personal life. It also set him on the path to becoming a professional writer. The years that followed were marked by struggle and ambition. Truman worked odd jobs: fact-checker at The New Yorker, ghostwriter, editor, while tirelessly honing his voice. His personality, both magnetic and controversial, brought him friends and enemies alike. He embraced his difference proudly, refusing to hide his sexuality despite the risks in conservative mid-century America. Throughout these formative years, Truman Capote's complex identity was being forged. Part Southern storyteller, part New York socialite, part literary innovator. He learned early that survival meant observation, watching people, understanding their desires and flaws, and turning those insights into stories that could captivate and disturb. The boy who had once listened in silence was now ready to speak. And speak he did, with a voice unlike any other, destined to change American literature forever. As Truman Capote stepped into his late teens and early 20s, his life became a whirlwind of ambition, discovery, and the pursuit of a place where he truly belonged. Having arrived in New York City, a young man from the South with a delicate voice and a sharp mind, Truman was determined to make his mark, not just as an eccentric socialite, but as a serious writer who could command respect. New York in the 1940s was a world of paradoxes. Vibrant yet ruthless, glittering yet shadowed by prejudice. For Truman, it was both a playground and a battleground. The city's literary and social elite fascinated him, but it was also a place where his differences made him a target. Truman's open homosexuality, flamboyant style, and theatrical personality set him apart at a time when conformity was expected and difference punished. Yet he refused to hide who he was. Instead, he transformed those traits into his greatest assets. Early on, Truman found himself drawn to the bustling literary circles of Manhattan writers, editors, critics, and artists who gathered in smoky cafes and private salons. His sharp wit, dazzling conversational skills, and unapologetic self-confidence earned him a place among the greats. He became a protege of the famous editor Whit Burnett, who recognized Truman's unique voice and helped him get published in Story magazine. His story Miriam, published when he was just 18, introduced readers to his haunting and lyrical style, a blend of Southern Gothic moodiness and urban sophistication. But success didn't come easily. Truman balanced a series of odd jobs: fact-checker for The New Yorker, freelance writer, ghostwriter, while relentlessly polishing his craft. The literary world was competitive, and Truman had to work harder than most to prove himself. His early work was sometimes dismissed as too flamboyant or eccentric, yet his talent was undeniable. He had a gift for dialogue, a keen ear for the nuances of human behavior, and an ability to capture complex emotions in a few carefully chosen words. It was during these years that Truman began to fully embrace his identity, both personally and artistically. His flamboyance, velvet suits, dramatic gestures, and that unmistakable voice became his trademark. He reveled in the attention, but he also used it as a shield to protect his vulnerable inner self. Truman's public persona was part performance, part armor. At the same time, his literary output began to attract attention. His first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms, 1948, was a semi-autobiographical tale that shocked and fascinated readers with its frank exploration of sexuality and isolation. The novel's lush, poetic prose and haunting themes of alienation and identity announced the arrival of a bold new voice in American literature. It wasn't just a book, it was Truman's declaration of self. The novel's success opened doors, and Truman quickly moved in influential circles. He mingled with actors, artists, socialites, and intellectuals. He became a frequent guest at lavish parties and exclusive events, where he held court with charm and sharp humor. His circle of friends grew to include notable figures like Dorothy Parker, Tennessee Williams, and later, his lifelong friend Harper Lee. But life at the top was complicated. Truman's relationships were often fraught with tension. He craved love and approval but was guarded and sometimes cruel. His addiction to alcohol began to creep in, a way to numb insecurities and cope with the pressures of fame. Despite the glittering facade, Truman was a deeply sensitive man grappling with loneliness and the weight of expectation. In 1958, Truman released Breakfast at Tiffany's, a novella that captured the charm and melancholy of New York's social scene through the unforgettable character of Holly Golightly, a woman who was both enchanting and elusive. The story's adaptation into the iconic 1961 film, starring Audrey Hepburn, only heightened Truman's fame. Holly Golightly became a symbol of post-war American glamour and complexity, and Truman's place in cultural history was cemented. Yet Truman's rise was not without sacrifice. Behind the scenes, he battled the contradictions of his life: celebrity and solitude, brilliance and addiction, acceptance and alienation. The glittering parties masked a man who often felt profoundly alone. This chapter of Truman Capote's life was one of dazzling success, but also of growing internal conflict. It was the stage upon which he prepared for his most ambitious and defining work yet, a project that would both immortalize and unravel him. By the early 1960s, Truman Capote was riding a wave of fame that few writers could ever imagine. His sharp wit, magnetic personality, and literary successes had made him a fixture in the elite circles of New York and beyond. But Truman was restless. He craved a new challenge, something that would push the boundaries of storytelling and cement his legacy as one of the most innovative writers of his generation. That challenge arrived unexpectedly in the form of a brutal and chilling crime: the murder of the Clutter family in the small town of Holcomb, Kansas. The news of the senseless slayings, a prosperous farmer, his wife, and their 2 teenage children, shot execution style in their own home, gripped the nation. But it was not just the horror of the crime that captured Truman's imagination. It was the human stories hidden beneath the headlines. Truman, along with his childhood friend and fellow author Harper Lee, traveled to Holcomb to immerse themselves in the community. It was a world so different from the glamorous Manhattan soirees Truman was used to, quiet, tight-knit, marked by genuine kindness and grief. The juxtaposition was stark and haunting, fueling Truman's desire to tell a story that would go beyond facts to reveal the deeper truths of human nature. Over the course of 6 intense years, Truman poured himself into the investigation. He interviewed law enforcement officers, townspeople, and the accused killers Perry Smith and Richard Hickok. What started as journalistic curiosity evolved into an emotional obsession. Truman was drawn not just to the crime, but to the complexity of Perry and Dick, two flawed, tragic figures shaped by poverty, abuse, and desperation. Perry Smith, in particular, fascinated Truman. Beneath his hardened exterior lay a vulnerable man haunted by a troubled childhood, dreams of escape, and a yearning for love and acceptance. Truman saw reflections of his own fractured past in Perry's story. The pain of rejection, the search for identity, the scars of loneliness. This empathy complicated Truman's relationship with his subjects, blurring the lines between observer and participant. The writing process was grueling. Truman sought to create what he called a nonfiction novel, a revolutionary form that combined the factual rigor of journalism with the narrative depth and emotional resonance of fiction. He labored over every detail, every word, to capture the voices, the settings, and the devastating impact of the murders. His meticulous style was unmatched, blending scenes, conversations, and internal thoughts into a seamless narrative that felt immediate and immersive. When In Cold Blood was finally published in 1966, it was met with critical acclaim and widespread fascination. The book was unlike anything readers had seen before, a chilling, haunting masterpiece that exposed the darkest corners of American life. It catapulted Truman to the pinnacle of literary fame, making him a household name overnight. Yet the success came with a price. The emotional toll of the years spent living so closely with such tragedy left Truman exhausted and vulnerable. He later confessed that writing In Cold Blood had drained his creative spirit. The once brilliant and confident writer found himself struggling to produce new work of equal power. Moreover, Truman's relationships with Perry Smith and Richard Hickok became sources of controversy and personal torment. Many criticized him for his sympathy toward the killers, questioning his ethics and motivations. Truman himself grappled with feelings of guilt and confusion, torn between the need for truth and the compassion he felt for broken men. The fame brought by In Cold Blood was intoxicating but also isolating. Truman found himself under constant public scrutiny, his every word dissected by critics and fans alike. The pressure exacerbated his struggles with addiction and mental health, and the bright star of his youth began to dim. In Cold Blood was both the crowning achievement of Truman Capote's career and the beginning of his unraveling. It transformed American literature but left Truman haunted, a man who had touched the depths of human darkness and paid a heavy price. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, Truman Capote had become much more than a literary icon. He was a symbol of glamour, wit, and social intrigue, a man who seemed to embody the very essence of New York's elite cultural scene. But Truman was not just a writer. He was a celebrity, a magnet for the rich, the famous, and the powerful. He had become the quintessential raconteur of his time, adored and envied in equal measure. At the center of this glittering world were the women he affectionately called his swans. These were the exquisite, powerful socialites who moved in rarefied circles of wealth and influence, and who saw in Truman not only a charming companion but a keeper of their secrets. The swans were legendary. Women like Babe Paley, the style icon and social queen, Gloria Vanderbilt, heiress and fashion muse, Slim Keith, the epitome of cool sophistication, and Lee Radziwill, sister of Jackie Kennedy. Together, they represented an era of elegance and exclusivity, A world of private jets, lavish balls, and impeccable manners. Truman adored these women. They fascinated him with their grace, poise, and complex lives behind the perfect facades. He saw in them reflections of his own longing for acceptance and belonging. They, in turn, lavished him with attention, granting him entree to their private lives and social sanctuaries. In many ways, Truman was their court jester, their confidant, the one who could amuse, flatter, and articulate the secrets they whispered behind closed doors. This circle became a defining feature of Truman's life during this period. He was often seen at their elegant homes in Manhattan or Palm Beach, surrounded by glittering parties and elite gatherings. His signature velvet suits, exaggerated mannerisms, and sparkling conversation made him a fixture on the social scene. Photographers adored him. Magazine profiles celebrated him as a symbol of wit, style, and sophistication. But behind the glamorous veneer, Truman's life was far more complicated. The very intensity of his friendships with the Swans concealed tensions, jealousies, and unspoken rivalries. Truman's relationship with these women was both adoring and fraught with power dynamics. He craved their approval but also wielded immense power over them. His razor-sharp observations and biting wit could cut deep, and his gift for storytelling meant he knew their secrets better than anyone else. This delicate balance shattered in 1975 with the publication of La Côte Basque, 1965, a thinly veiled roman à clef published in Esquire magazine. The story was Truman's attempt to capture a snapshot of this elite world, the glamour, the secrets, and the scandals, but it went far beyond affectionate portraits. His characters were recognizable as the very Swans who had been his closest friends, and the story exposed infidelities, betrayals, and intimate details of their lives in a way that was shocking and unforgivable. The social backlash was swift and severe. The Swans felt deeply betrayed, their trust broken. The elite circles that had once welcomed Truman with open arms now shunned him. Invitations stopped coming, doors closed, and Truman found himself isolated from the very people who had defined his social life and much of his creative inspiration. It was a social exile that cut deeper than any literary criticism. This exile marked the beginning of Truman's slow decline. No longer the darling of the social scene, he struggled to maintain his influence and creativity. His substance abuse worsened, fueled by loneliness and despair. Parties became less frequent, his public appearances more erratic, and his once brilliant mind clouded by addiction. Yet, even as his world unraveled, Truman remained a figure of fascination. His every move was scrutinized by the media and public alike, his vulnerabilities on full display. He was a man caught between the glittering past and a precarious present, struggling to hold on to the pieces of a life he had once commanded with such flair. Behind the social scandals were deeper personal struggles. Truman had experienced a life filled with abandonment and longing. His relationships, whether with lovers, friends, or patrons, were complicated by his fear of rejection and his need for adoration. The same qualities that made him beloved also made him vulnerable. His sensitivity, his brilliance, his willingness to expose the truths that others wanted hidden. During this period, Truman also grappled with the unfulfilled promise of his literary career. The success of In Cold Blood had cast a long shadow, and his attempts to write another work of equal impact were met with frustration. His magnum opus, Answered Prayers, was left unfinished, a fragmented manuscript full of scandalous revelations about the rich and famous, a project that seemed to consume him but never reached completion. Truman's life in these years was a study in contradictions. He was a man who had once seemed destined for immortality, now battling demons that threatened to consume him. The brilliance of his youth had given way to a fragile, often broken figure. Yet even in decline he remained magnetic, a symbol of both the heights of cultural success and the depths of personal pain. As the 1970s waned, Truman Capote's story became a cautionary tale about the costs of fame, the price of betrayal, and the loneliness that often accompanies brilliance. The Swans, once his closest companions, had become part of a gilded cage he could no longer escape. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, Truman Capote's once bright star had faded into a flickering light struggling against the darkness of addiction, isolation, and disappointment. The man who had once commanded the attention of the world's elite with his brilliance and charm was now battling personal demons that threatened to consume him completely. The years following the scandal of La Côte Basque and the social exile that followed were marked by a relentless decline. Truman's addiction to alcohol and drugs, already present during his heyday, intensified. Friends and acquaintances described him as increasingly erratic, brilliant moments shadowed by episodes of deep despair and self-destruction. His once sharp wit was dulled, his presence more fragile. Where he had been a radiant social butterfly, he now often appeared gaunt and vulnerable, a man struggling to hold himself together. Yet even as Truman's life spiraled, his desire for creative expression did not completely vanish. He worked on Answered Prayers, a literary project meant to expose the hidden lives of the social elite, his swans and their circles, in a way no one had dared before. It was intended to be his grand masterpiece, a scandalous, unflinching portrait of power, privilege, and betrayal. But Answered Prayers remained incomplete, published only in fragmented excerpts that only deepened the intrigue and speculation around Truman's final years. Truman's relationships during this time were equally fraught. His closest friends were often left worried, confused by his moods and behavior. He struggled with loneliness, even amidst the company of old acquaintances and new admirers. The fragile nature of his mental and physical health became increasingly apparent. In the early 1980s, Truman Capote's health deteriorated rapidly. Years of heavy drinking and substance abuse took a devastating toll on his liver and overall well-being. Though he attempted to maintain his social connections, his public appearances became rare and his presence less commanding. He was no longer the dazzling figure who once captivated rooms with his voice and stories. On August 25, 1984, Truman Capote died at the age of 59. His death was officially attributed to liver failure complicated by drug intoxication. He passed away in the home of Joan Carson, ex-wife of famed television host Johnny Carson. A poignant reminder of the complex, often turbulent relationships that marked his life. But even in death, Truman's story was not straightforward. His ashes were famously stolen shortly after his funeral, an odd and macabre twist that seemed to encapsulate the chaotic nature of his life's final chapter. The urn passed through multiple hands, and parts of it were reportedly sold or displayed as bizarre souvenirs. This strange posthumous episode only added to the mythos surrounding him. Truman Capote's death marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of his transformation into a cultural legend. His influence on literature is undeniable. In Cold Blood forever changed the genre of nonfiction, pioneering the nonfiction novel and demonstrating the power of narrative journalism. His works challenged readers to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity, crime, and society. More than that, Truman's life story became a lens through which the complexities of fame, sexuality, and creative genius are viewed. He was a trailblazer, a gay man living openly at a time when society was far less accepting. He embraced his identity unapologetically, paving the way for future generations of writers and artists. His legacy is also a cautionary tale about the costs of fame and the fragility of the human spirit. Truman Capote's brilliance was shadowed by personal pain, loneliness, and addiction. Yet, his words continue to captivate, his voice still resonates, and his story continues to inspire. In the decades since his passing, scholars, fans, and new generations of readers have rediscovered Truman's work. Documentaries, biographies, and films have explored both his literary achievements and his complicated personal life. He remains a symbol of the dazzling heights and tragic depths of artistic brilliance. Truman Capote once said, "Failure is the condiment that gives success its flavor." His life, filled with dazzling success and profound struggles, embodies that truth. Though his final years were marked by darkness, the light of his contributions to literature and culture continues to shine, reminding us that even the brightest stars can burn out but leave behind an unforgettable glow. As we come to the end of our journey through the extraordinary life of Truman Capote, it's clear that his story is far more than just the tale of a famous writer. It is the story of a man who lived boldly, loved fiercely, and created art that changed the way we think about truth and storytelling forever. Truman Capote was a man who dazzled the world with his charm and wit, whose presence could light up the most exclusive rooms filled with some of the most powerful and glamorous people of his time. But beneath that dazzling exterior was a deeply complicated human being, full of contradictions, vulnerabilities, and a relentless search for identity and belonging. From the tender, lonely years in the South where he learned to observe and listen, to the bustling literary circles of New York where he carved out a unique and unforgettable voice, Truman's life was marked by brilliance and struggle in equal measure. He was a pioneer, unafraid to challenge norms. Whether it was in the art of writing or the way he lived his life as an openly gay man in a society that was not always kind or understanding. His courage to be himself, even when it brought pain and isolation, helped pave the way for others who came after him. His literary achievements, most notably in Cold Blood, revolutionized nonfiction and storytelling. With painstaking care, he took readers beyond mere facts and headlines into the hearts and minds of real people, their hopes, fears, and complexities. Through his writing, Truman invited us to see the world differently, to recognize the humanity in even the darkest stories. This gift, this ability to blend fact and narrative artfully, remains a monumental contribution to literature that continues to inspire writers and readers alike. Yet, as much as Truman Capote's life was about dazzling success and artistic triumph, it was also a tale of loneliness, addiction, and heartbreak. The glittering parties and adoring friends could never fully fill the void that haunted him. Behind the scenes, he struggled with his demons, the betrayals, the social exile after his revealing writings about his Swans, and the relentless pressures of fame. His life was a fragile balance between the public persona he carefully crafted and the private pain he often tried to hide. The story of Truman Capote reminds us how complex the human experience truly is, how brilliance can come with a price, how the desire for acceptance can drive people to both greatness and despair, and how the search for meaning is a journey that few complete unscathed. Truman's relationships, from his childhood friendship with Harper Lee to the glamorous yet volatile bonds with his Swans, reflect the yearning for connection that defines us all. In reflecting on Truman's legacy, we are invited not only to celebrate his genius, but also to contemplate the challenges that come with living authentically in a world that often demands conformity. His story is a mirror held up to society, reflecting the beauty and the cruelty, the light and the shadow that shape our lives. It reminds us that behind every legend is a human heart beating with hopes, fears, and dreams. Thank you for walking this path with me, diving into the life of a man who gave us unforgettable stories, unforgettable characters, and an unforgettable voice. If Truman Capote's journey moved you, whether through his literary genius, his complex humanity, or his fearless individuality, I encourage you to share your thoughts below. What parts of his story resonated most with you? How do you see his impact on literature and culture today? Please like this video if you found it compelling, subscribe for more deep explorations into the lives of fascinating figures, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. There are countless stories still waiting to be told, and I'm honored to share them with you. Until next time, remember, every story has its shadows and its light, and the most profound tales are those that reveal the truth of our shared humanity. Truman Capote's life is a testament to that, a shining, complex, and enduring legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us all.